/PACT, or you can call 1-800-MY-VA-411. 1-800-MY-VA-411. And then lastly, this is important legislation that just came out, and you can help us by spreading the word to all the veterans you know. Take any of the materials we've got out here.
Much Adam for bringing that information to our attention. Is Mr. Andrew LePray from Kent County Veteran Services Office, and his office does help with claims, and he's going to give us a lot of information. So thank you for joining.
So welcome, thanks for coming out. I'm just kind of here to share County Veteran Services. All the counties in West Michigan have a County Veteran Services except for Ione County. They do that, but the rest of them do. So you can come to us with any of your VA benefits needs. They take care of the health care side of things. We take care of claims, emergency relief grants, all that kind of stuff.
In the event that you are a veteran and you become unable to pay your bills, the Veteran Services has a grant that they can help you in paying those bills or getting into a rental and many different other services. So when it comes to military toxic exposures, the VA has found many different things that cause chronic multi-symptom illness, or what they are now calling military toxic exposure. What was originally called Gulf War illness or Gulf War syndrome. The VA has been conducting research on this since the early 90s, since the first Gulf War. And why we're here today is to speak to you about a portion of the exposures that they're not talking about, and that's vaccinations. So all the military exposures that they have came up with can be found on the VA's public health website. And there's a plethora of different ones, from vaccinations to oil well fires to chemical and biological weapons, occupational hazards, the PB pills, pesticides, sand, particles, many of the sand and dust and particles that were found on the equipment that was coming back from the Gulf, how a possible connection with this intergenerational exposure. And so that's an additional piece that the VA is now starting to research using an independent study, is determining how did we pass that on to our next generation? How did that go passed on to our spouses, to our children? And how are they at risk for some of these chronic illnesses as well? So the reason and how we get these this research conducted is by veterans spreading the word. Veterans like myself who start 501c3s to bring this information to our fellow veteran community so that we can then go to United Congress and get things changed in the system. Because the only way to get anything changed in the VA is through congressional mandate. And so that is exactly what individuals in Burn Pits 360 has done. And that is how we have the PACT Act today, from veterans like veteran Leroy Torres and his wife Rosie, who have fought so hard over 10 years marching on DC, speaking with fellow veterans, getting people to listen to finally get things changed in Congress. And that's exactly what happened with the contaminated water at Camp Lejeune with Tara Craver when she lost her husband to cancer as a result of the toxic waters that were on that camp. These are how we get things changed in the system, by veterans getting together, standing up, showing there's a reason for a change to happen, and making it happen through Congress. And when it comes to military vaccinations, we haven't had that availability to have that speech. We haven't had that hearing in Congress. And we haven't had that since 106 Congress, when it was mandated that 100% of all service members get the vaccine, the anthrax vaccine, from 97 to early 2000. And at that point, the 106 Congress decided to do an investigation into the process of this vaccination and why we were getting it at 100%. And once they did so, they found a lot of data determining not just the manufacturing practices, but what was in the vaccine itself. And so with this research, the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center was put together. as part of the Gulf War Illness Clinical Trial and Intervention Consortium, which includes three different risk centers, one in California, one in New Jersey, and one in Miami. So depending on where you are in the region is where you'll go to one of these risk centers. And why that's important, because when you go through the registry, the Gulf War registry or the burn pit registry, the next step is to be seen at the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center, because they are the only ones equipped with the knowledge to deal with your case. And when it comes to vaccinations, they haven't done the proper research to determine what that looks like and presents in the body. What they do know, and what they risk determined through their pamphlets and the education that they put out, is that it's a standard series of inoculations against infectious diseases provided to any U.S. citizen, not just veterans, traveling to the Gulf, including yellow fever, typhoid, cholera, hepatitis B, meningitis, whooping cough, polio, tetanus, anthrax, botulinum toxoid, and smallpox. All of these vaccinations are possible causes for chronic illness or Gulf War illness, or what is now called military toxic exposure, is one of the possibilities that our veterans could have caused their chronic illness. Chronic illness that looks in my body, it's crazy that I'm having this flare right now. A lot of people don't understand what that's like, what I'm dealing with. But what I have is called autonomic neuropathy. It's a neuropathy of the autonomic nervous system. And what that does is the autonomic nervous system controls everything in your body. Everything, when you see a stimulant like lights, or when you have an environmental change from hot to cold, your body has a reaction. Your nervous system tells what hormones to produce, it tells what neurotransmitters to produce, it tells you how your body can react. Right now, I'm having a difficult time speaking to you because of the flare. I am tremoring because of the flare. And it is as of this reason from the vaccination injury that has caused this in my body to present in this way. Now, you can see it in other veterans, and they it presented as fibromyalgia, or gastric issues, or Parkinson's, and many other medical conditions. But what the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center, and more specifically Dr. Ashford, which is a neuropsychologist, has determined that more likely or not, from his hypothesis, that every veteran that is dealing with a variation of this chronic illness is as a result of the damage to the autonomic nervous system. And how he determined this is because of how it affects the body and how it presents in the body. And without this research, we may never know how many veterans are affected by the vaccine itself. But what we do know, and the reason why the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center is collecting this data, is because there is a definitive difference between our deployed veterans and our non-deployed veterans. For myself, I didn't deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan. I spent 10 years on active duty in the Army from '98 to 2008, and I was medically chaptered as a result of my vaccine injury. But back then, we didn't know how it presented. We had no idea because there was no research conducted to understand how it presents in the body. It takes years in some patients to finally be presented as a neurological condition and determine through the root cause analysis that it is from the vaccine. And so when we take that definitive data from our deployed versus our non-deployed, we can determine what is caused by that environmental factor of being over there in Iraq or Afghanistan versus the chronic illness factor of just the vaccinations and other exposures itself. And that's why the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center has included the non-deployed in their data collection. So when you think of Gulf War illness or military toxic exposure, it doesn't just include those who have deployed. It includes all veterans who served from the Gulf War era from 1990 until present day. So that's a huge disconnect in our current VA system, because they're giving a lot of mixed information on exactly who's eligible for this program, especially when it comes to those who didn't deploy. So when you're like me and you go into the VA and you haven't deployed and you show them with all these, present them with all these different medical conditions, the first thing they're going to do is deny that you have anything wrong. They're going to deny again and tell you that there's absolutely no way that this could be military service connected, and then they're going to gaslight you, make you feel that it's all in your head and there's nothing wrong. This will go on for years until you can show them that the root cause analysis definitively from the information that we have gathered for you and our fellow veterans and those members at the VA to show proof, because that is whatever the VA is at. Veterans have to show proof that they are ill, that they are service connected for their injuries and illness, and unfortunately for those who either deployed or not deployed, it is a difficult challenge. So that's why we're here today, to help make it less of a challenge for you. When it comes to the vaccination process, there is absolutely no protocol. There's no treatment protocol, there's no diagnostic protocol, there is no research. So for those patients like me that have to go to the VA and prove that we are injured, it takes a lot of work. For what I had to do, I had to pay over $20,000 in lawyer fees to get 100% disabled. I had paid over $8,000 to a federal law group to have my chapter turned to a retirement, that was still not achieved due to the nature of the way that our government has put things in place. So that is why we're here, to try to change this. Without research, we can't change it for anyone. And as I said, with the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center evaluation, Dr. Ashford had some critical research that he just presented at the engagement session they had this past quarter. Every quarter, the Gulf War Consultorium has an engagement session that veterans can either present or call in and ask questions and determine what's going on with this further research. As of 2019, they have spent over $500 million on researching the effects of Gulf War illness and have spent none on vaccination research. So Dr. Ashford from the Risk Center determined that he would conduct the research on what is going on with the autonomic nervous system. And what he determined was that it is affecting all veterans that have Gulf War illness, as I stated earlier. But the reason why he found that is because the immune reactions that he was seeing in his fellow veterans, they were injuring our lymph nodes and causing lymphedema, injuring peripheral neurons, which causes neuropathy, causing dysautonomia, which has presented in myself, which dysautonomia causes a lot of major medical conditions, one of which is called POTS. It's a postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where it's difficult for the patient to stand for long periods or come from a sitting to a standing. They will pass out right before your eyes as a result of not being able to give blood to the brain effectively due to the nervous system damage. And then every other organ that the autonomic nervous system regulates, like our gut, causes things like gastroparesis. And so as he was seeing these presented in veterans, that's how he determined that there's something definitely going on with the autonomic nervous system, and the damage that has caused it. There's been inconsistent findings between these studies to determine what is exactly causing the nervous system damage. He just knows that there is a large group, and it's just too difficult to determine what the exact cause is. So far, they have determined what those causes are from all these different possible exposures, like I stated earlier. The autonomic nervous system, and it causing that different things presented in the body. It causes direct damage to the peripheral nerves, which is that neuropathy and that chronic pain, as I was stating earlier. It causes damage to the brainstem, which is your parasympathetic and being able to know where you're at in the world, and having that vertigo. It causes damage to the spinal cord. We have a lot of research that still needs to be conducted. When it comes to vaccinations, we know that some vaccinations have caused nerve damage in other patients. We know for a fact that the squalene adjuvant has caused Guillain-Barré syndrome in other patients. We know for a fact that the anthrax vaccine did have the squalene adjuvant placed in it. We know for a fact that the manufacturer was having unsafe practices, and the squalene adjuvant was placed in these vaccine lots that some service members received. We know for a fact that vaccinations cause injury. We just don't know how it presents in the body. So the War-Related Injury and Illness Center is really the only place that has the knowledge that can give us that information. So in order to get there as a veteran, you have to first go through the environmental coordinator, through your primary care provider. You'll go through the Go4 registry and possibly the Burn Pits registry as well. And then you'll be seen through the War-Related Injury and Illness Study Center. I highly suggest that you are seen through the Palo Alto, California clinic, because they have a lot more knowledge of the overall exposures that cause both deployed and non-deployed chronic illnesses and how it presents in the body. I am trying to get through this flare and doing best that I can. It is not easy being a disabled veteran and having over 40 different disabling conditions that cause over 60 different symptoms, trying to present to a community as to why we need change in the system so that we can have this research to get these prerequisites, because that's the only way that we can have claims and to have this knowledge is through research, gaining the prerequisites and understanding how it presents in the body and what is causing this chronic illness. So without further ado, thank you for coming. Is there any questions regarding any of the topics that we've covered this evening? Yes, sir.
You mentioned anthrax a lot, but and maybe I missed it. Is the VA recognizing and taking care of folks that have challenges directly related to their being inoculated with anthrax?
They are and they aren't. That's a great question, thank you. As I stated before, as veterans, we have to prove that we are sick, and we have to prove that it's caused from our military service. When it comes to the anthrax vaccine, it depends on who you talk to. Yes, they are saying that the anthrax and possible smallpox are the culprits that are causing this chronic illness on our veterans. But without further research, we have no clue as to which vaccine it is specifically. The risk has military codes, and that is how we get prerequisites and different things when it comes to our claims. And in the medical community is medical coding. That's how we deal with insurances. And so they do have medical coding for vaccine injury, and the War-Related Injury Illness and Study Center has given both of those to me. It's a medical code that has been like no other code. And when I looked it up on Google, it's an actual medical code from the WHO, the World Health Organization. And so we have a long ways to go to determine what those prerequisites are, which vaccination caused the damage, and to update our vaccination evaluation reporting system and determine who's more susceptible to vaccine injuries so that we can decrease those possible patients that could become vaccine injured. We have seen a large increase in our vaccine injured community as a result of the COVID vaccine being 100% and not being understanding of how that presents in the body and who can become injured from having an adjuvant-induced vaccination of that form. That's something I didn't cover, and I'll do that real quick. Is adjuvants are placed into vaccinations to make the vaccination itself stronger. And when we have antigens like anthrax in our biodefense weapons or COVID in a pandemic, we have to then do what they call an emergency service vaccination process. So it doesn't go through the research that most vaccinations do. And as the anthrax vaccine, as well as the COVID vaccine, we were the human trials. And so the anthrax vaccine immunization project was the human trial for the anthrax vaccine during 97 to the early 2000s. Thank you, sir, for your question. Does that answer it?
Yes, I have a follow-up, a different angle.
Okay.
And this might be more both in the VA both, but whoever knows. A lot of what the PAC Act, maybe all of it, addressed was presumptive stuff, is that right? So I don't want there to be any confusion in the crowd. This young lady had mentioned that the burden being on the veteran, but if it's presumptive and it says if you've got chronic, I think bronchitis, if you've got chronic bronchitis and you have boots on the ground in X, Y, and Z countries, all you got to prove is that you got this condition. The rest of it's presumptive as long as you can show you've been in the country. Is that right?
That's correct. It's for certain, and they're listed here if you want to take a look at them. There's certain conditions that are presumptive.
Sure. So
It's not a one-size-fits-all, of course.
Anthrax vaccine. Operation Truth has found a research organization that has been working with the VA since the early 90s researching these military toxins, and they have agreed to work with Operation Truth and start this first of its kind independent research, or hopefully U.S. Congress-backed and paid funded research. Either way, we will be able to determine who's more susceptible to vaccine injury by finding that genetic biomarker. They've already done so, they being the VA and the Department of Defense, to find out who's got that genetic biomarker for malaria. If you have a genetic biomarker to have more susceptibility to have adverse events for the malaria therapy, they have found ways to treat those patients without using the malaria treatment. So there is a way that we can do the same with vaccinations for anthrax and other antigens. By determining who's more susceptible to those vaccination injury, we can come up with a different therapy for those patients without further injury and risk of injury. In addition to that research, we're also going to be conducting research to determine how it presents in the body. Those prerequisites, what that looks like, what the vaccine causes damage in the body. That's very important going forward. Any other questions? All right, great. Thank you so much for coming this evening. We are going to continue to have these type of events. I'm hoping every quarter so that we can bring this information to our veterans. It's very important that our veteran community and civilian community understands that there are many military or different environmental toxins that cause chronic illness in the body, and why it's so important to take care of ourselves in many different ways. So thank you again for coming this evening, and have a safe drive home.